Welcome to Upticks. I'm Jake Falcon.
And I'm Corey Bittner. We're the founders of Falcon Wealth Advisors and your co-host for Upticks.
Today is our 35th episode. If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense.
We're talking about what a financial plan is, questions worth asking, and dividend-paying stocks.
Okay, Corey, please forgive the silly title of our show today. I heard that on a song last night, and I thought it'd be pretty funny.
I liked it.
Fair enough. So for our first topic, we wanted to talk about what a financial plan should be and perhaps what it shouldn't be. So maybe I can kind of go into probably what that is. So for many of our clients, they understand that we do create these financial plans. Mm-hmm. And I think, a competent advisor, across the industry, they're doing that now. But the issue is, I think a lot of advisors use it as a crutch or a selling tool, and those are things that maybe a plan shouldn't be.
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think a lot of advisors will create a plan for a client and they'll hide behind it, and they'll say that, this plan needs to be carried out to a T, or your whole retirement's going to be thrown out the window. Or they'll use it as a selling tool to say that somebody doesn't have enough life insurance or long-term care insurance.
Gotcha.
So maybe you could kind of go over what, the way that we use plans for our clients, and maybe the process that we think is important when you're looking at a financial plan. Sure.
So our approach as far as financial planning for our clients, and really if somebody was coming on board as a new client today, we typically like to take the time in an initial meeting just to talk about their goals, talk about their financial situation, and talk about what's important to them. And then after we've taken all of that into consideration, the risk tolerance is a component of that also. We really kind of build out a plan based around their goals. And when I say goals, I mean retirement might be a goal, paying for grandkids' college might be a goal, traveling, X times per year might be a goal, paying off the house quickly might be a goal, etc. Right? So we will actually build that framework, plug in all those specific goals, talk about how we're going to fund each one of those with the money that they've saved or they're continuing to save, and then how to go about investing that money accordingly to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. And I think the most important thing to take away from this segment is to also realize that a financial plan is a living, breathing document. So while we'll do this exercise that's pretty intense initially to establish the plan, most importantly, I think the most important thing that we do is that we revisit this plan at least every 6 months, typically. And we want to make sure that if the goals have changed, that we update it. Maybe the market hasn't returned what we expected. Maybe our clients came into a windfall. Maybe they had to spend more money on a goal that we didn't project for them because we all underestimated. So again, the plan is not this static, concrete structure that once it's built, it has to play out that way, or your whole retirement is going to be thrown out the window. It's basically, a framework of something that we're establishing. I wouldn't even call it a roadmap. A lot of advisors call it a roadmap or whatever.
Yeah,
it's not a roadmap because a roadmap doesn't change either.
Right.
So our plans, they're living, they're breathing, they're dynamic. We change it. One things we don't change though typically are target rates of return, because again, that's basically market assumptions that we've made on the stock market going back since the 1920s.
Sure.
So that average may shift a little bit. Not really. We don't change it. And ultimately, what will change, though, are people's lives.
Yes.
And so, again, a plan is a tool that we use to have some sort of goal for the investments, rather than just throwing them out in the stock market and hoping we make the most amount of money that we can. We want to use that plan to do that.
This is kind of like a big picture question, but frankly, I've never really done it this way. I mean, I guess there's been one-off scenarios, but as long as I've been in this business of wealth management and financial planning and investment advisory, et cetera, it's always revolved around financial planning, which has made good sense to me. That's why I believe in it.
Right.
My question is, how do advisors go about giving someone investment advice if they don't have a plan for them?
Yeah, I think that's a very old school way of doing things. I started in this business, and with the first firm I started at, we actually didn't really do financial planning. I think it was just barely being looked at.
Sure.
And I thought it was silly. You would basically sell somebody an investment and they would have to trust you, and you'd hope it'd go up. So I think if
Hope is not a very good strategy,
yeah,
right?
yeah, not for this. I mean, that should be used for different things. And so the idea is, ultimately, if you're working with an advisor and they don't create a financial plan, to me, that would be a big red flag. And then, even advisors that are using plans, though, you have to be careful because a lot of them, again, I think they use it as a crutch or a static document, or they'll create a plan for you once and then never update it. And so the most important thing is that you have a competent advisor that knows how to use the tool properly, and then they're updating it regularly. And
Yep.
that's really the big issues. But a financial plan is not a roadmap. I don't think it is a roadmap. I don't think it is something that is static, and that if things get off kilter, it's going to be thrown out the window. It's part of life. It's like you have a fitness plan, or you have a diet plan, or you have aspirations to get married or to have kids. It's all that stuff. Things come up and they change, and that's just financial plan is just kind of one other portion of your life.
And I'm sure you have the conversations with clients as frequently as I do, where they talk about, this expense came up that I wasn't expecting, or this expense came
Right.
up. And, I have a lot of people that joke that, like, it seems like every year it's 10 grand on something that I didn't plan.
Yeah, exactly.
for.
And the good news is we can build those into the financial plans. And so that's something that you and I obviously have done over many years. And so, as chartered retirement planning counselors, the key is that, both of us are chartered, and we focus on retirement planning.
Yes.
So if your advisor doesn't have that designation and they're trying to talk to you about retirement planning, I'd just be careful and ask them maybe why they haven't, if that's what they're trying to do, why haven't they spent a focus on educating themselves on that?
That's good.
Perfect. All right. So let's move on to our next segment today, which will be questions worth asking. And now, last show, you stumped me on this one, and I was trying to think of something to stump you, but I don't know. I could come up with something, but it'd be so opaque or out of this world.
Outlandish?
It wouldn't really be fair.
Okay. Well, thank you.
So I'll kick off first. So my question I wanted to ask you, since we just talked about financial plans, is what if you're meeting with this has come up lately, and it comes up pretty often for me actually. What if you're meeting with a prospective client and you're building out their plan, and you ask them how much money they want to spend in retirement, and they can't answer it? How do you help guide to get it in? Because ultimately you have to have that. It's part of the financial plan. You need to plug in that number. But what if the potential client or even your client doesn't know? What do you do?
It does happen. It happens fairly often. And it's usually a good problem to have if somebody's making enough money that they don't have to necessarily worry about every penny.
That's what I was going to say. It's funny how this works, but the clients that make more money or have more money saved, especially the ones that don't have much debt, they're the ones that actually this comes up for more often. It's
Right.
the people that maybe don't have that much money saved, or they don't make as much money. They kind of know what they spend because they're just on a little bit of a tighter budget. But yeah, go ahead. So how would you answer that question?
Sure. So the approach that I would take there first is, assuming they're still working, I would get a feel for what their monthly take-home after-tax income is currently.
Okay, so you just pull out their W-2s if they're married, husband and wife, and you'll look at what their take-home is, add the two together, and that's where you'll start?
Yeah, that's kind of a basis. But from there, I'll also evaluate, somebody's basically the liability side of their balance sheet. Because if somebody says, well, I'm taking home, my wife and I combined are taking home $6,000 a month after taxes, but we have $40,000 or $50,000 in credit card debt, that might mean that they are living outside of their means, and theoretically they need more than what they're bringing home because they're spending more than what they're bringing home. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. Also, if somebody thinks that they're going to need a significant amount less in retirement than what their current take-home income is, they don't necessarily understand that might mean a pretty traumatic, or dramatic, I should say, adjustment in their lifestyle that they've become accustomed to.
Right. So what this looks like is let's say we do the math, and between the two, spouses, they're bringing home $12,000 a month, and they come in here and say, "Oh, I've got it figured out. We only need $4,000."
Exactly.
And it's a third of what they're living
Yeah.
off of now.
Yeah.
Particularly if they don't have a lot of money in their savings.
Sure.
Us as retirement planning guys, I mean that's a red flag that we say, whoa, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about really, because you don't have hundreds of thousands in your checking account. You're bringing home $12,000 a month. You're telling me you only need $4,000. Well, what's going to change to make that happen?
Right.
And ideally, what we look to do is we want that transition to retirement to look like they're still working.
Yeah.
So if you're bringing home $12,000 now, we want you to bring home $12,000 when you retire. But the beauty is you don't have to go to work.
Right.
And that's really what our goal is, our starting point. Now, another thing I wanted to mention is that we'll also want to bring on health insurance. So
That's the other thing I was going to say.
perfect.
So go ahead.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
So if you're 55 and you're retiring, obviously you're probably getting health insurance through your employer. But that's not calculated in your take home because that's coming out before you get paid.
Right.
So now if health insurance is going to cost you $1,000 or $2,000 a month, that's definitely something we'll need to tack on top. So if you need $10,000 a month, but we need to go get you some health insurance, maybe now that goal is $12,000 until you get to Medicare. Now Medicare is not free, but the cost certainly is expected to drop for someone that's 55 once they turn 65.
Correct.
What else? Did we miss anything else on that question?
I would probably just take the time to talk about any other expenses that they might have in retirement that they don't currently. What would
that be?
I think a big one is travel. Not that people don't travel while they're working, but sort of thinking through what dollar amount are we spending when we travel now? What dollar amount do I maybe want to spend? And is that going to be above and beyond my monthly take-home income, or am I just going to simply pay for that out of cash flow? Because that's not always the case, right? A lot of times that's not the case.
Right. And also some expenses will flip the other way. I mean, if you're
Sure.
driving to work and you have a 30-minute commute every day, your gas bill's probably going to go down. Or if you eat lunch out every day, you spend $10-20 a day, that's going to drop. So,
Yep.
But maybe now you want to go get a gym membership because that's something that you've always wanted to do. And so that's an added cost. So those are conversations that we have with our clients. We certainly have budgeting worksheets if they need it. Most of our clients, I think they run a spreadsheet on their own, or they just, again, they're in their 50s or 60s. They know how to manage their money as far as the day-to-day
Right.
cash flow goes. But again, we're here to help. And we want to make sure, if anything, that we over-project a little bit. That way that they're pleasantly surprised that their financial plans actually, as time goes on, look a little bit better.
Right.
Versus the other way where sometimes clients, they underestimate and they'll tell me, look, $8,000 a month is going to cut it, but they get into retirement and they're actually spending 10 or 12, and it's a different conversation. It happens. And that's certainly why we're here to help our clients. But ultimately you've got to be honest with yourself. You got to be honest with us. And if anything, we need to round up some of those expenses to make sure that we don't have a surprise in the other direction. Which, again, if that happens, that's okay too. We'll just do some advanced planning and figure out what we need to do.
And building on, exactly, and I think to kind of sum that up though, building on the whole planning conversation that we've had thus far, if we do our due diligence collectively with the clients in advance of retirement and we can kind of hone in on what those numbers are, ideally we can avoid a scenario where they get into retirement and find out that somebody needs more than what we planned for.
Right.
Part of our job is to help them figure that out in advance.
Yeah, good.
As closely as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Question answered. So what's your question for me today?
Okay, so I have another question for you that a client just asked me this week that's also planning related.
All right.
And I wrote it down here, so I want to make sure that I read it correctly. What I wrote down was, when do I have to start taking money out of my retirement account?
Okay.
How much do I have to take out, and by when?
Okay, that's a great question. So they're referring to what's called a required minimum distribution, and it's an IRS rule. And basically, once you turn age 70 and a half, you have to start taking out this required minimum distribution. Now, this is a ballpark. It's typically about 4% of the account value, and it comes out annually. And that's something as part of our service that we calculate this for our clients, and we make sure that it comes out by December 31 for them. Now, if you're already taking distributions from your retirement account in retirement, that counts towards this required minimum distribution. So it's not like you have to take something above and beyond. So many of our clients are satisfying that because they are already spending money. But if they're not, that's okay too. What we typically do is we'll either send it to them and they can spend it at their discretion, or we'll move it over to a taxable account and reinvest it for them in there.
Yep. No, that's good. That's a good answer. The only thing that I wanted to add to that, this is just kind of a caveat to it, but I have found myself talking about it on several occasions really over the last couple of months for whatever reason. A number of people turning 70 and a half this year in 2019 are trying to figure out when they have to take the required minimum distribution. And the only caveat I was going to add to that is if in the very first year that you're required to take it, you actually have until tax time the following year to take it for year one. The kicker there is if somebody did that in 2019 and they took their 2019 required distribution in the first 3 or 4 months of 2020, they would also have to take their 2020 required distribution before December 31st.
So if they take it in 2019, does that count?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yes. It was more about, it was kind of a one-off circumstance, but it was more about, hey, if for whatever reason from a taxable income standpoint, it makes sense for me to punt this into next calendar year, do I have the ability to do that if I turn 70 and a half this year?
Gotcha. That's funny because that's one thing I didn't know for sure. That's why I didn't say anything about it.
Gotcha.
So I'm glad you added that.
Yep.
So that's good. So again, question answered there. Perfect. So as always,
Well done.
If you have any questions that you want Corey and I to address on our show, certainly send us an email or you can
Please
ask on Twitter on here. Okay, good. So let's move into our next section, which I wanted to talk about dividend paying stocks. There's been a recent announcement in Kansas City that one of the large publicly traded companies, Cerner Corporation, announced a dividend. And so I wanted to talk because I think people that normally don't invest in dividend-paying stocks, I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there of exactly how that works. So maybe you can dive into exactly why do companies pay dividends to begin with?
Generally, the reason a company would pay a dividend to begin with is to reward its shareholder. They're effectively returning income to the shareholders. They're returning profits, right? Or they're returning income, and they're paying them on a quarterly basis for being a shareholder.
Gotcha. So
at a high level.
Right, no, so it also entices people to perhaps buy that stock, right? So if you buy that stock, say, hey, I can buy 100 shares and I'm going to get an income stream off of it and I never have to sell shares to actually make money or take some money from it.
Yes.
Now, the big problem I think that a lot of people don't recognize, and it's not to their fault, they don't understand it if they're not in finance, is that when a company pays a dividend, once that dividend is paid, the actual share price goes down by the dividend amount.
Okay.
So so if a company announces a 15-cent dividend that's going to be paid out in April, well, that day that it gets paid out, if the stock's trading at $50, well, that stock's going to immediately go down to $49.85, right? So it's not like you get to keep it at 50 and get this dividend on top. I think it's a big misconception because a lot of times people will say, well, I really like getting that dividend, and that's fine to get that income, but you're not necessarily making any more money by doing that, right? Your value, so if you have $1 million in the stock and it pays a dividend, that account value is still $1 million. It doesn't magically go up. The difference is you own the same amount of shares and now you have some cash.
Got it.
But you still have $1 million. It didn't go up by the dividend amount. The stock actually goes down. Now the hope is that the stock will then keep growing and go up, and then you'll make money. But that's not necessarily the case. Some stocks that we buy out there pay 5 or 6% dividend, but the stock never really goes up. But to us, that's okay because we never have to sell the shares for our clients, and they're collecting about a 5 or 6% dividend,
right,
which is pretty good. But if a company is only paying a 1% dividend, to me, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I'd much rather the stock go up 10% versus collect a 1% dividend. And so that's, I guess the point of having this conversation is because a company announces a dividend, or even if a company that pays a dividend, it doesn't necessarily mean that is a reason to hold it. Because, theoretically, I could take that money in a stock that's only paying 1% and go move it to a stock that's paying 5 or 6%. And now I just made you a lot more income off the dividends versus holding the one that you have. So don't be fooled. And it's not that companies are trying to fool anybody, but don't be fooled into thinking that you're going to get this dividend from a stock and this is going to be this great thing. It's not necessarily the case.
Right. Well, let me ask this question, not to put you on the spot here, but I think it's pertinent and timely given the discussion that we're having about dividend-paying stocks. Why is it that a company that hasn't historically paid a dividend would decide to start paying one?
I think that's interesting. Apple did this a few years ago also, and the way I saw it with Apple, in my opinion, is that Steve Jobs was the innovator, and a new CEO took over, and maybe I don't know this. Obviously, you can't really quote me on this, but maybe in Apple's instance, maybe they felt like the innovation had kind of gone. Not peaked, but maybe that they weren't such a growth company anymore and that they wanted to start rewarding their shareholders for owning their stock. And so they've matured more into a value stock versus a growth stock. So I think if a company doesn't think that they need all of their cash on hand to be reinvested back into the company, that's why they would pay out a dividend.
So maybe it would be, and again, I'm not.
And again, this is all theoretical.
Nothing here is set in stone. We're not, advising anything specifically. One question I do have, though, in your opinion, would it be potentially a fair assumption for me to make if I'm an owner, if I own stock in a company that hasn't paid a dividend historically, and it begins or announces that it's going to start paying dividends, would it maybe be a fair assumption that my expectations for what that company might do moving forward might be a little bit different?
Yeah, I would think so, right? Because they're clearly changing their investment direction,
Right.
For better or worse. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, Apple's done well since it announced its dividend, I believe, right?
True.
So it doesn't mean it's a bad thing at all. It's just I think the leadership just takes a different stance, and that's okay. But again, so there's two types of stocks. There's growth and there's value.
Sure.
Growth stocks typically don't pay dividends, and the whole goal for that is that the share price grows.
Right.
Value stocks, they typically don't grow as fast, but they kick out a nice dividend. So they're just two different types of companies that exist out there. And again, doesn't make one better or worse. In our opinion, a diversified portfolio requires both. So for our clients, we have dividend stocks and we have growth stocks.
Yes.
We have small ones and large ones and medium-sized ones. So again, I don't necessarily think it's a good or bad thing, but I don't want people to be fooled into thinking, oh, this dividend's a great thing, I'm going to make tons of money. And that's not necessarily the case because the share price goes down by the amount of the dividend. So it's a wash. But the whole hope is that you would get this dividend and the stock goes up. Then it would be a win, obviously. Right. And so that's what we're hoping for, obviously, for Cerner. Again, I think you'd ultimately have to ask leadership. I think every company makes that decision based on their unique circumstance. But it's just something that I think investors should be wary of and just know that it's something that we pay close attention to and that we understand. And we look at that when we're building portfolios.
Okay. That's good.
All right, good. So that's why I wanted to bring it up just because it's something that's recent here in Kansas City. Okay, so to our fun topic here, our global talk. I don't think I told you what I wanted to ask.
So here's another chance for you to stump me.
All right, so here's my surprise story. So I like using this global topic to talk maybe more about personal stories and personal finance. And so what I wanted to ask you today is if you could go back and give your 16-year-old self some advice or financial advice, what would you tell yourself?
16 years old?
Yeah, so you're 16 years old. That makes you probably a sophomore, junior in college or high school. And what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'm going to point this out because you use the age 16. And I'm thinking that's when somebody starts driving, or at least that's when I started driving.
Okay.
That a vehicle, right, the cost of a vehicle and everything associated with it ultimately is something that's going to get you from point A to point B.
So did you buy your first car?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Fortunately, I was benefited. It was an older car, but my first car was something that my parents had bought and said, here, this is your car to drive for now.
Okay.
But my point is, when I first started driving at 16 years old, I thought down the road, I was like, oh, well, I want to have just this amazing car.
Like a Lamborghini, or what do you want to have?
It changed. It would have changed on a
What was it at
basis.
16?
Oh, it was probably like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini.
That's what you wanted?
Probably, which I don't have, nor will I ever have.
You're never going to have one?
No.
Okay.
Because I guess my point is this. As time has gone on, a lesson that I have learned that I would tell myself then is that if every time, and this is just a personal thing, it's very different for everybody.
Right.
But for me, I've just come to realize in upgrading vehicles over the years and therefore upgrading the cost associated with those vehicles, I have learned that at the end of the day, it's just something that's going to get me from A to B, and it either sits in the garage here at our office or it sits in the garage in my building where I live. So my point is, you don't personally, it's become less important to me to have the best, fastest, nicest car simply because of the fact that, in my opinion, it's a big expense for something that's just going to sit there.
Good answer.
Totally
That's
me
good.
personally.
That's pretty good. I didn't stump you too much. And so to answer my own question, my 16-year-old self, I would probably say, I was in honors classes in high school. I was like, I would consider myself a bright guy that tried to be cool too. So I didn't...
Tried.
Yeah, tried. Very big tried to be cool. So I was in all these honors classes, but I didn't really take school probably seriously. I made good grades and I did fine. And my parents were always fine with my grades. Again, but I think I let my natural intelligence get me by. And I wish I would have probably nerded out a little bit more and maybe taken high school a little bit more seriously. Not that I didn't get into the college I wanted to. It didn't really hinder anything, but I just think it would have been, it's funny, things that I'm interested in now, I think like I read a lot more now and
Right.
I just do more nerdy things. And I think I've always been that way. I just tried to be cool and didn't do that stuff. And I wish I probably would have done more of that in high school. I think I probably would have gotten more out of my education. Not that I think it hindered in anything in any way, but I think I just it would have been fun going back to take high school and college, frankly, more seriously and be more involved. I always thought you need the diploma to get into college, you need the college degree to get a job. But after that, it's going to be on me to determine if I'm successful or not. And that's actually how it's played out. But
Right.
just for a pure personal knowledge standpoint, I feel like
Sure.
it would have been a lot more beneficial if I would have maybe emerged more and been a little bit nerdier in high school. Maybe I get that because my wife, I think, is a little on the nerdy side, and she's brilliant, and she talks a lot about her high school and college
Very, very
courses.
smart.
Right, and I'm like, I was in that stuff, and I kind of remember, but I didn't really take it too seriously. You know?
Was college, and I think you maybe insinuated this, was your approach to school in college similar to high school?
Same.
Really?
Same, unfortunately. And so that was going to be the second part of this question. What do you tell your
sorry.
No, that's fine. What do you tell your 21-year-old self? And so mine's probably the same answer. Is that I was a business major. I was doing business classes really more to find out what I wanted to do, and finance happened to be one of my favorite classes that I took, and that's kind of what led me this direction. But same idea in college was, hey, I just need to get a degree, and I'm going to go make my way in the real world because I'm a hard worker and I'm smart. But again, I wish I would have taken some of those courses maybe more seriously, and maybe be more involved in business, the business side of college versus fraternity and student government and the social things, which it was fun and it's definitely
Yeah, there's
helped
nothing
me.
wrong with those either.
Yeah, they've helped me out. They've given me leadership skills and how to work with different types of people. But in the end, I think I should have nerded out a little bit more. Spent more time in the library in college than with my frat brothers,
Sure.
which are good guys. Oh,
Yeah, no, I get it.
What about you, real quick? So to wrap up here, what about your 21-year-old self? What would you give advice?
So
You took college seriously, didn't you?
I did, and I really don't have a huge explanation. I think I do, that once I went off to college, for me, something in a switch just flipped. My approach to high school was very similar to yours, where I felt like I was able to get through, and I was getting A's and B's, right, mostly, and the 3.0 to the 3.5 GPA, but just sort of, being on the football team and everything else was more important to me at that point in my life. But in college, I think just a switch flipped, and interestingly enough, part of a student organization that I joined, there was somebody in a leadership position that came to me very early on in my college career,
Mm-hmm.
like within probably the first 8 weeks or so, and said, you're going to be expected to be a leader of this organization, and you need to take your education and the things that you're doing here seriously. And I think that was just the first time that somebody came to me and said, like, I can see potential in what you're going to do. This is going to be important to you. And then on the flip side of that, I think I understood the investment that I was making and the investment that my parents they were helping me out where they could, and the cost associated with college. When I was seeing other kids, fail out after one semester, I was determined to not let that happen to me.
Good.
But
What advice would you give yourself?
as far as advice goes, it would be less about education. It'd be more about a career, and it'd be more about the future. And then I think at that point in time in my life, there's probably a lot of people that are very idealistic about the way that the world is or the way that things should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very fortunate to have fallen into a career that I love and take very seriously.
Yeah,
and
did
it's
we meet
important
when
to
you
me.
were 20?
Yeah, when I was in college.
Yeah.
I started.
So you had it all. I already gave you all the advice you needed at that point.
Well, I guess here's what I learned, or here's the advice I would give myself, is that no matter what field you're going into, no matter what industry you're going to start in, there's always going to be challenges associated with it. Nobody, even the most successful people in the world, don't just have some perfect job where every single day of their life is the best day that they've ever had, and they don't have any adversity or challenges that they have to overcome.
That's good.
And that, more importantly, or not more importantly, but along with that, it doesn't always mean that the grass is going to be greener on the other side. So somebody who's always chasing, that perfect job or the perfect world, having the realization that a lot of the responsibility falls on you to make the world around you the way that you want it to be, and recognize that everything doesn't revolve around you and things aren't always just going to go exactly the way that you want them. That's part of life. And if you embrace that as opposed to trying to resist it and go find something else that's going to make you happy,
that's good advice.
You'll be better off.
I think that's good advice for anybody.
Right.
So, well, perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for tuning in and watching our show today. As always, you can find us on social media.
Yep.
Of course, we've got an Instagram page. Why, I don't know, but we have one.
Yeah. I'm learning.
This is our YouTube channel. Please like our content, share it, subscribe to our channel. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We've got a blog out there that also comes out on Tuesdays to our subscribers. And then, of course, you can find me personally on Twitter at Jake Falcon, CRPC.
And you can find me on Twitter at Corey Bittner, KC.
Thanks again for watching, and we hope you all have a great week.